Tonight, we explore the lives of two men whose names would become synonymous with horror. John Joubert, a boy from Portland, Maine, whose obsession with fear and control would lead him across state lines, and Stefan Vitek, a man molded by abuse and neglect in Czechoslovakia, whose lust for domination would culminate in a crime so grotesque it shook a nation. If you think you can understand evil, think again, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story of murder, it's a story of how monsters are made. Chapter 1. Childhood Shadows. John Joubert grew up in a quiet neighborhood in Maine, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and small disturbances are magnified. But John's life at home was far from peaceful. His family was distant, cold, and often indifferent. By the time he reached middle school, John was being bullied relentlessly. He was quiet, socially awkward, and entirely without friends. Athleticism and social charm eluded him, leaving him an easy target. Each taunt, each shove, each whispered insult at school compounded a bitterness that festered at home. Somewhere between the ages of 12 and 13, Jon began to fantasize, not just about retaliation, but about control, about watching others suffer. His first act of violence was almost ritualistic. Following a boy home from school, he waited until no one was around and strangled him until he passed out. John walked away calmly. No one suspected, and worse, John felt something new, not guilt, not shame, but satisfaction. Soon he escalated, cutting classmates with blades, stabbing one girl with a pencil, slashing another with a razor. Each act was subtle, deliberate, and unpunished. By high school, John maintained the facade of a model student, good grades, band participation, Boy Scouts. Behind closed doors, however, he immersed himself in violent detective magazines and fantasies of domination. By 18, the fantasies were no longer enough. He joined the United States Air Force, a world of structure and precision, yet his nights remained consumed by images of tying boys up, torturing them, and reveling in their fear. Half a world away, in Podbrezova, Czechoslovakia, Stefan Vitek faced a different, yet equally cruel, childhood. Born in 1960, Stefan grew up under the tyranny of a violent alcoholic father. Nights at home were battles, mornings were silent recoveries. When his fragile mother died, 18-year-old Stefan was left alone with a father who had already beaten any trace of innocence out of him. Stefan discovered pain as a form of control. At 14, while his peers explored love, Stefan explored cruelty, first on animals. He castrated bulls, sliced open livestock, and marveled at their agony. He discovered arousal in suffering, forging a lifelong connection between violence and desire. Both boys, worlds apart, were shaped by trauma and neglect. Yet for Jon and Stefan, pain and cruelty were not merely survival, they became a blueprint for their darkest desires. Chapter 2. First Signs of Violence. Jon's early attacks escalated methodically. The thrill of control became a ritual. Each victim was chosen at random, each act carried out with precision. One girl, one boy, stabbed, slashed, yet never caught. The satisfaction of getting away with these acts only deepened his obsession. By the time he joined the Air Force, Jon's fantasies had reached a crescendo. He imagined tying children up, inflicting pain, and watching terror play across their eyes. Meanwhile, Stefan's experiments had begun to merge with sexual impulses. By 16, he transitioned from animals to humans. His first human victim, a developmentally disabled woman, survived barely. Yet her cries ignited something dark within him. Later, in cemeteries and barns, he assaulted women, driven by a compulsion he could not resist. The combination of alcohol, unchecked rage, and sexual sadism made him dangerously unpredictable. Experts say these early behaviors are critical warning signs: cruelty to animals, obsession with control, early sexualized violence, and emotional detachment. Yet both John and Stefan evaded detection. One lived behind a disciplined facade, the other behind a seemingly ordinary life in a quiet town. Chapter 3. Escalation to murder. For John, the fantasies became reality in Maine on August 22, 1982. 11-year-old Richard Setson left home for a morning jog. Hours later, his body was discovered mutilated by strangulation, stabbing, and biting. The killer left almost no evidence. Police were baffled, and the case went cold. John moved to Nebraska, continuing his spree. In Bellevue, September 18, 1983, Danny Jo Eby, 13, was abducted while delivering newspapers. Bound, gagged, stabbed, his body left on a dirt road. Clean, methodical, without a trace. Then came Christopher Walden, 12, kidnapped and brutally killed along railroad tracks. The common thread was chilling, binding, precision, and deliberate infliction of fear. Police had few leads until a teacher spotted John near a school watching boys. A license plate led investigators to John Joubert. Confronted with rope and a knife matching the murder scene, he confessed with eerie calm, recounting the murders in detail, describing the terror in his victims' eyes as the climax of his pleasure. Half a continent away, Stefan's crimes escalated with the same terrifying pattern. By 1987, alcohol and rage combined with years of compulsive sadism. On October 30th, 1987, Stefan attacked his wife Maria and 2 young daughters in a summer cabin. The violence was ritualistic and grotesque, extending beyond death into sexualized desecration. When he surrendered to police, he calmly admitted his actions, describing them as the greatest pleasure of his life. Both men illustrate the step-by-step escalation from fantasy to reality, from private cruelty to public horror. Each act was a ritual meticulously planned and driven not by impulse, but by compulsion. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Monsters. John Joubert and Stefan Vitek were not impulsive killers, they were methodical, ritualistic predators. Experts who studied them described a disturbing pattern: childhood trauma plus emotional detachment plus obsessive fantasy is equal to compulsion to dominate. For John, the bullying he endured created a sense of powerlessness he could never tolerate. The early strangulation incident, followed by stabbing and slashing, gave him a sense of invincibility. Psychologists described him as having sadistic sexual fantasies, obsessive compulsive tendencies, and a complete lack of empathy. He understood right from wrong but did not care. The thrill of fear was more potent than the act itself. Stefan's pathology followed a similar trajectory, but with variations rooted in his upbringing. Born into abuse, alcohol, and neglect, he learned early that pain equaled control. Torturing animals became the first step in fusing pleasure and suffering. By adolescence, his sadism was sexualized. Psychologists noted sexual arousal from domination and helplessness, traits typical of a sexual sadist. Stefan also displayed compulsive planning, ritualistic behavior, and emotional detachment, hallmarks of a psychopath. What makes these men particularly terrifying is their ability to blend in. John was a model student, an Air Force radar technician, polite and unassuming. Stefan appeared as a factory worker, a husband, a father. To neighbors, colleagues, and friends, there was nothing monstrous in their appearance. But inside, both rehearsed horror repeatedly in their minds, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Experts emphasize that many killers are products of environment and psyche, not supernatural evil. Trauma, neglect, and lack of emotional guidance can warp moral compasses into something unrecognizable. John and Stefan illustrate this better than almost any case studied. Chapter 5: Crime Scenes and the Horror. They left John Joubert's murders were surgical in their terror. When Richard Setson was found, the body showed signs of strangulation, stabbing, and biting. Minimal evidence was left behind, showing John's careful attention to detail. Danny Joe Eby was bound with rope so tightly it cut into the skin. Christopher Walden had stab wounds that were deliberate, precise, and terrifyingly methodical. The fear he inflicted was more than violence, it was psychological domination. Stefan's crimes, in contrast, were grotesque and ritualistic. In his summer cabin, Maria's body was mutilated. Decapitation, dismemberment, and desecration extended beyond death. The children, Helena and Anichka, suffered the same fate. The cabin became a ritualistic chamber of horror, leaving detectives traumatized for life. Investigators reported vomiting, refusing to enter a second time, and describing the scene as ritual from hell. Both men left scars beyond the physical. Families were shattered. Parents never returned to homes, unable to face the places where their children once lived. Siblings and relatives lived with permanent trauma, and communities were gripped by fear and paranoia. In John's case, parents of abducted children moved, fearing the streets themselves. In Stefan's, neighbors lived in disbelief that a seemingly normal man could commit such acts. Chapter 6: Capture, Confession, and Trial. John Joubert's capture was the result of observation, patience, and a lucky tip. A teacher noticed him near a school, suspiciously watching boys. The license plate led police to John. He was polite, cooperative, and eerily calm during questioning. Confession came after mounting evidence. Military-issued rope matching the bindings, knives identical to murder implements. John described the killings with detailed pleasure, reliving every moment of fear he induced. In court, John pled guilty to Nebraska murders, receiving the death penalty and life imprisonment in Maine. Over the years, he filed appeals, claiming harshness and vague legal terms, but courts upheld his sentence. He spent over a decade on death row, consistently expressing no true remorse, only repeating that the killings calmed him. Stefan Vitek, on the other hand, surrendered to police 2 days after the murders, bloodied and delirious. During questioning, he described every step without emotion, recalling acts as though replaying a dream. Psychiatric evaluation confirmed psychopathy, sexual sadism, and complete lack of empathy. He did not act out of impulse or loss of control. He acted because domination and fear were a source of life and pleasure. Stefan's trial was grim. The verdict: death by hanging. He would become the last man executed in Czechoslovakia. He was unemotional, awaiting the execution quietly, reflecting on his own pleasure in the acts he committed. Both men's trials serve as grim reminders. Some monsters are fully aware of their crimes, and no law or therapy can undo years of compulsive depravity. Chapter 7: The Legacy of Fear. John Joubert's legacy is not just in the lives he ended, but in the lives he destroyed. Parents were broken, communities shattered, and childhood innocence lost. The ripple effect of fear, trauma, and paranoia continues even after his death. Psychologists studying him describe the case as a textbook example of a compulsive sadistic predator, one who plans, observes, and relishes fear itself. Stefan Vitek's crimes left similar echoes. The summer cabin was reclaimed by the forest, but the horror remained in local memory. Experts noted that his childhood trauma fused with compulsive sadism to create a man who could only experience control through violence. His empty soul, once craving pain, became a predator capable of unimaginable acts. Both stories highlight the making of monsters. Neither Jon nor Stefan was born fully formed evil. Both were products of abuse and neglect, unchecked compulsive tendencies, emotional detachment, ritualized fantasy, and obsession with domination. Their cases also underscore a terrifying truth. Monsters often walk among us, indistinguishable from ordinary people. They are crafted over time, their pathology hidden behind facades of normalcy. Lessons from darkness. What can we learn from Jon Joubert and Stefan Vitek? First, early warning signs matter. Animal cruelty, obsessive fantasies, early violence, and emotional detachment are red flags that cannot be ignored. Second, trauma and neglect can twist empathy into cruelty when left unchecked. But perhaps the most unsettling lesson is this: monsters are not always obvious. Jon wore a uniform, Stefan a fatherly mask. Both committed horrors that terrified entire communities, yet they did so with a calm, deliberate detachment. They remind us that evil is not always loud, chaotic, or impulsive. It can be quiet, methodical, and patient. For families of victims, life never returns to normal. Morning routines, walks to school, and summer cabins become places frozen in fear and memory. Communities learn to be wary, neighbors grow suspicious, and innocence becomes fragile. In the end, Jon Joubert and Stefan Vitek are reminders of the fragility of morality and the power of compulsion. Their deaths ended their personal reigns of terror, but the lessons linger. Trauma, neglect, and unaddressed compulsion can give rise to horrors beyond imagination. So, the next time you walk past a quiet, polite stranger, remember, evil sometimes wears a mask of normalcy, and the darkness it hides may already be rehearsing its next act. Thank you for watching. If you want more deep dives into the psychology of killers, their crimes, and the stories that shape them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. You can also support the channel by becoming a member, helping keep these stories coming so we can explore the darkness that lingers behind the masks of normalcy. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're sitting quietly among us, waiting for the perfect moment to act.